Nestled among the rolling Piedmont hills of the Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area, just 20 miles east of downtown Atlanta, Georgia, is a small farming community established decades before the Civil War. In the early 1800s, this small but tightly knit community was known locally as Flat Rock. Not seen on a map since 1865, Flat Rock was once a center of agricultural life and river transportation, but today is barely a line in the history books on DeKalb County. Its entire African-American heritage was nearly lost forever beneath its stony ridges, fields, and riverbeds. During a period spanning more than 200 years, Flat Rock provided a significant human genealogical mosaic, a history of intertwined relationships whose bloodlines were entombed for years in marked and unmarked burial sites in Flat Rock's slave cemetery. Those graves and the stories told by descendants of the families whose ancestors are buried there have now become the links to a past that today casts a new light on the very essence of who we are as Americans. At its core, Flat Rock is a microcosm of America. This once uncharted landscape was sacred ground for the nomadic Native American Indians that returned to its riverbanks like bloodlines to the heart.
As history tells it, I'm from the Lower Creek, from the Eufaula band of the Star Clan of the Muskogee Nation. The stories my family told me were that a long time ago we were called the Anikusa. Anikusa was virtually the people of peace. And so actually Flat Rock called Kusawati. It was the Kusawati of Flat Rock, the place where peaceful people gather. Our people moved a lot, contrary to what a lot of people think. We moved our camps every 7 years. So we'd move up creek or down creek for 7 years and then recycle the land like that. We believed then that, the white people took care of the air, that the black people took care of the earth, that the red people took care of the fire. There are a lot of people married to one another, and so you might be an Irish guy with a Cherokee wife or a Creek wife or a Creek guy with a French wife, And then that's when it all started happening. Then the federal government came down here and decided this is the way it should be. Now, well, the settlers sided with the natives. Natives, we were all in this together. We had already intermarried. And so when the federal government said, all Indians got to go to Oklahoma, everybody was upset. It split up a lot of families. And so when the United States, when the federal government wanted to take away the land, the rebels, the Red Sticks, the insurgents, fought to keep their home. The Trail of Tears in the stories that I've heard was kind of the apex of the bad days. There was like at least 10 holding tanks up here in North Georgia before they sent them out there. It took 10 years to get everybody out there. It started around 1830, and by 1840, pretty much everybody that was going to go was out there before things got so bad. People ran to the mountains. Our people went down to southern Alabama where nobody would follow them. Seminoles went down to Florida. People scattered. But that's pretty much, and it was a horrible, I really don't enjoy reliving the stories that I've been told about what occurred on that trip, only to tell you it was one of the most horrible atrocities ever committed against an indigenous people.
DeKalb County was formed in 1822 out of primarily Henry with a little bits from other surrounding counties. the Georgia government got that land from the Creek Indians and immediately divided it up into land lots and had a lottery. You actually went to your corner store or whatever, and you drew out of a number out of a barrel, and that was the land lot number that you got, and the only thing you had to do was pay a processing fee for the paperwork and the deed to get that property. Many people didn't take up those lots, and the person who originally drew this particular lot obviously didn't take it up because he immediately sold it to George Lyon. Two brothers, also William and Thomas, the sons of Joseph Emmanuel Lyon, also drew land in Georgia. Slave labor allowed the South and Johnson and Lyon families to expand their operations and begin to grow a cash crop, which in turn, of course, made them even more prosperous. They were here earlier than some of the families who came across the river from Henry County and settled here in the 1880s and 1890s. They were both took advantage of the fact that land was inexpensive, and they bought up a lot of land, became quite prosperous, were slaveholders. Both of those families were, as was the Lyon family. But George Lyon, according to a lot of the documents that are available, became a relatively wealthy man. He was a slave owner, and that tells you that this was not just a subsistence farm once he got it going.
Cotton, or white gold, was the most important and widely used fiber ever known to man. It would become the largest cash crop in the Southern American colonies. Around 1619, the first Africans arrived in America as indentured servants. On the brink of the Civil War, nearly half of Georgia's population, a total of 280,000, were slaves. The mixture of Native American, African American, and European genes are physically evident in many Americans, including the descendants of the Flat Rock community.
Eliza was my great-great-grandmother. She is also the great-great-grandmother for all of us Waiteses. She was born around between 1820 and 1830, we're not sure. She lived in the house with the Souths. We've seen that in the 1870 records, that she lived in the house with the Souths. She had 8 kids. Out of those kids, she had 61 grandkids. And I always tell people in the Waits reunion, if you know the 61 grandkids of Eliza Waits, then you know the entire family, because someone is always going to connect with the 61 grandkids. So Eliza was a very important woman to the Waits family, meaning that all of the prominent people in the family and everybody, all of us have the same great-great-grandmother. And she is also buried in our slave cemetery here in the Flat Rock community. I opened my mouth. Flat Rock United Methodist Church, the church that is located in the Flat Rock community, was founded in 1860. And it was founded before they actually got a structure of churches. They worship in tabernacles, churches without a wall. And of course, everybody knows the obvious reason why they didn't have a wall is so that it can be observed. Flat Rock community, I think the churches was so important because this is where you had leaders. This is where you had structure as far as education and everything. So the churches was so important because this is the only place that we had to look up to black leaders and our communities.
I know I've been changed.
Taylor and I, we started singing together when we were about 4 and 6 at Big Miller Grove Baptist Church.
I know I've been changed. I know I've been changed. I know I've been changed.
This unmarked stone in Flat Rock Slave Cemetery is the gravesite of Spencer Bryant, great-great-grandfather of actor and director Chris Tucker. Spencer Bryant was born a slave in 1864. By 1903, he was the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Flat Rock Methodist Church and one of the prominent leaders who would build the foundation and institutions of the Flat Rock community.
He was a local minister. They called them local preachers, you know, when they didn't travel. He wasn't a traveling minister, but he was a local minister who directed services at the Flat Rock Methodist Church at that time. And he lived just down the road from us, I guess about a quarter of a mile.
I remember Mr. Spencer Bryant because he was the minister of the church when I was a teenager, young girl rather. And he was a very important person in the community because, he had a big 2-story house and what you call a ballpark, and on holidays he would have big picnics and sell refreshments, and teams would come from other communities and play ball. We had a lot of respect for Mr. Spence Bryant. You know, he was like a father to the whole community.
The angels in heaven.
My father, he really loved his community, and he wanted to keep people in the community. He bought the first 40 acres in 1926, and that I was only 4 years old at that time. And I don't know how he came up with the money at that time, but.
While the country was in the throes of the Great Depression, T.A. Bryant Sr. became one of the first African-American landowners in Flat Rock. It was from one of the first original white settlers, John South, that he purchased his first 40 acres, who then began selling land to family and other members of the community.
Dad, after renting from Mr. South this 40 acres of land, had a chance to buy it. There was a time when he wouldn't sell land to darkies, as he called them.
He was a good farmer because he wanted to be a good one. You know, he read about how you do things and he did it that way, and he raised a lot of, we didn't know what it was to not have food. We'd go out in the yard and in the summertime, this time of year, you had strawberries on the terrace out there in the field. You had dewberries on one of the terraces on the field. And you had peaches and apples and plums. Everything was getting ripe, you know, by June, July. You had watermelons in July, you know, cantaloupes. You always had food. I did a lot of things that boy do. I plowed some, hoed cotton. I told, the fertilizer and the cotton seeds when it was planted. I dropped all the corn from my daddy's to my granddaddy's.
I never picked 100 pounds. He would always challenge us to try to pick 100 pounds a day. And the highest I ever got were 83 pounds. I picked 50 in the morning, but I couldn't get to 50 in the afternoon.
T.A. eventually rose to become a Master Mason, earning the title of Wishful Master, one of the highest positions in the 30 to 40 years of the local Masonic Lodge. By now, the small, struggling community of African-American farmers and sharecroppers in Flat Rock had built a church, a school, a Masonic Lodge, and eventually a small country store owned by Joe Kelly. Ms. Williams was 5 years old then.
My granddaddy had this store. He sold kerosene. He even somebody would deliver him chunks of ice, and he would pick the ice and sell people's 15-cent worth of ice. That was the only store. Grandmother would make good old ice cream and sell to anybody because they had a ball field down there in those woods back on this area down here. Everybody would come to the ball game, would stop at my granddaddy's store for snacks or whatever. So he didn't do bad having that little country store there.
Yes, Mr. Kelly had this candy store in his yard, and we would walk down. What's that street that he come down the street, and we turn in there to go to the school. It was a little shortcut, and we'd always come back in the afternoon, stop at his store, and get us a sucker of some kind of candy that he was selling. My grandfather, Eddy Lyons, he purchased the property from Mr. South. It was 50 acres of land, and it had 2 small houses on it. And we lived there after my grandparents died. We didn't have no problem until after my grandparents died. We lived there for a while, and then they wanted, I don't know who it was, trying to get her to sell the property, and she didn't want to sell. One Sunday night we was coming from church, somebody burned us out. My aunt and my brother was there, because the rest of us was at church. It was on a Sunday night. So we left the property. It had to be, we burned out.
These acts were always believed to be of a mysterious origin, and no one asked questions, especially not the tiny growing community of African Americans, former slaves now struggling to live off their small plots.
What I remember about Flat Rock School consists of all the grades, and to my knowledge, the teacher was only able to teach to the 8th grade. There was a one-room classroom. One teacher taught everybody. Because, however, the student body was maybe no more than 20, I imagine, for the whole school. We were all like family.
You didn't just go 1 year and make a grade. They put you through 2 or 3 years. I knew all the first grade book by heart before I got it. But they did that because you wasn't going no higher in the 7th grade. They didn't have no high school. When you got out of that school, you was in the field working. We didn't have a book that everybody could have one at a time, and you would use it and pass it on to the next, but very seldom it was available for you to take home. You know, when that cotton was to be picked, that was hard there, trying to be in school and get that cotton picked before whatever happened, rain, they had to take it off and get it baled up, and it was a certain time on that. So I'm sure it was times that I didn't really go to school.
I went to Flat Rock School, graduated from Flat Rock School, and I wanted to go to school so I could learn how to read the funny paper. The teachers always stayed at our house, but my grandmother used to cook some good fried chicken. I guess that's...
I mean, Miss Temple Lee, Julia Thomas, and Frankie Hardy was my teachers.
We had wonderful teachers who cared about the students. They made sure that the students had what they needed in order to progress according to their ability. They were able to get the program over to make you understand and learn. I think a lot of it was love and concern about what they wanted the community to be. There were teachers, I'm sure, that could not be paid as they should have been paid. Oftentimes my parents would give them vegetables and things like that because they had a large vegetable garden. They would share their vegetables with them in order for them to be able to continue doing what they needed to do for the education of the students. There were more than one school located in the Lithonia area. I would say the Flat Rock area as such. Each one of the schools burned on the same night. The Flat Rock School burned, the Miller Grove School burned, the County Line School burned, and there was a school in Lithonia. But however, it was one of those schools that burned.
It burned, and then after it burned, we went to school in the church.
While the little community of Flat Rock was beginning to see the fruits of its labor, just 10 miles north was Stone Mountain, the bedrock of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, incorporated in 1915, and its national headquarters was established, known as Clavern No. 1. Deceivingly peaceful during the day, the Knights were inflamed with terror. Flat Rock found itself surrounded and was warned daily of worse to come as lynchings multiplied in neighboring counties.
The Klan connection with Stone Mountain is with the ceremonies that took place there when a group of men, Robert Ramspecht included, and went out for that ceremony in 1915. That is where that association began. But there were tens of thousands of people in the Ku Klux Klan. This was a huge organization. There were probably more Klansmen than there were Shriners. Ramspecht became, for his day, a liberal and a functioning member of Harry Truman's administration as head of the civilian bureaucracy in Washington, appointed by Harry Truman, the man who incorporated the Ku Klux Klan in 1915. The head of the state government in 1924-25 was a Klansman. Every person in the judiciary in this state knew who the Klan's people were, and a majority of them were Klansmen.
When we would drive through Stone Mountain, and you could see the mountain more clearly than you can see it now somewhat, because it's really grown up. But we could see the mountain, and down in the mountain area where they have all these hotels and motels now, you could see the Ku Klux Klans marching around a great big cross. I mean, they would have a cross as high as a tree almost, and they would be marching around there, and it wouldn't be no one or two. It would seem like it'd be hundreds of them, and the cross would be completely on fire, burning. And we knew that we had no business going into Stone Mountain area at that time, but we could watch it from our cars or whatever, but we didn't stop. We just said, look at that, there they are. We always would say, you know, the Ku Klux Klans are down in the Stone Mountain tonight. And then
my dad had two of the finest mules in the country. Mule named Cora and Dora. They used to use them to drag logs from the woods to the sawmill, and to pull a wagon loaded with whatever you needed. And they were really fine. He kept them fat and curled up real nice and trimmed nice and beautiful. And those two mules was burned in the barn in 1934, 33 or 34, I don't remember exactly what year. But somehow, mysteriously, our barn caught a fire. One morning about 4 o'clock, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, we woke up and the whole area was lit up. That was one of the biggest heartbreaks and the biggest setbacks that I can remember my dad ever having. And my dad was real nervous after that happened. He was easy, you know, if he didn't hear you and you say something to him, he'd jump. nobody was ever convicted for it.
I think it's been a remarkable progression, but the history of the civil rights movement, the convict lease, and the very framework, the warp and the woof, as they say, the tapestry that is Georgia history is inseparable from these events.
Flat Rock is a place where we've had an explosion of the human spirit, and it manifests itself from that cemetery, from the remains of that ancient cemetery. The roots of so many families, black, white, Indian, have thrived in the soil of Flat Rock for so many years. So Flat Rock provides us with that opportunity to know where we came from, and that helps us navigate our way into the future. It's, quite frankly, it's a state and a national treasure, which we should make sure that we preserve and protect.
Today, the Flat Rock Slave Cemetery is a monument to the struggle and labor of the individuals who fought to build and preserve Flat Rock, people whose blood and tears soaked the land they worked from, whose foundation and institutions prevailed despite the failed hopes of Reconstruction and a century of brutal and repressive laws. They survived the Negro Codes, the prison lease system, chain gangs, Jim Crow, and found new hope through the Civil Rights Movement. To follow the history of Flat Rock is to finally understand America's history, rediscovering roots denied and buried, roots which, like the cotton they seeded, are deeply woven into the fabric of America. This year, local archaeologists and historians from the Greater Atlanta Archaeology Society, Fernbank Museum, and Georgia State University's Anthropology and Historic Preservation departments have descended upon Flat Rock for that very purpose. A local history center, museum, archive, and community meeting place, the Flat Rock Archive has established a place where visitors young and old can learn how the people of this antebellum community lived, worked, and worshiped over 200 years ago. The Lion River Plantation, some of DeKalb County's oldest historic structures, and a slave cemetery are just a few of the many historic jewels that are now being studied, documented, and officially mapped in Flat Rock. In our full-length documentary feature, we will explore deeper into the roots of Flat Rock's family tree, reconstruct its full historical past as it unfolds through the results of the scientific studies now being conducted.
In the future of Flat Rock, we feel that it will be and can be a place where people all over America come and to view how African Americans lived in the 1800s, early 1900s.